The bulldozer's engine roared to life at 6 a.m., its massive blade pushing 10 tons of wet cement toward David's pristine driveway. Through his bedroom window, he watched in horror as his neighbor Karen stood beside the machine, clipboard in hand, smiling with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd just checkmated their opponent. 3 months ago, he'd thrown away that HOA violation notice without reading it, just another piece of junk mail. He'd thought. Now, as the cement began hardening around his BMW, trapping it like a fossil in stone, David realized he'd made the most expensive mistake of his life. But Karen had no idea what she'd just unleashed. David Chen pulled into his driveway at 11:47 p.m., the headlights of his BMW cutting through the darkness of Willowbrook Estates. The engine's purr died as he killed the ignition, leaving only the distant hum of air conditioners and the soft rustle of perfectly manicured oak trees. He sat for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. After 14 hours of back meetings and a delayed flight from Chicago, all he wanted was his bed. The manila envelope on his doorstep caught his eye as he fumbled for his keys. Even in the dim porch light, he could see the official-looking seal of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. His jaw tightened. Karen Morrison again, no doubt. The woman treated the HOA presidency like it was the Supreme Court, issuing edicts and violations with the fervor of someone who'd finally found their true calling in life. David scooped up the envelope without breaking stride, his fingers already working to tear it open as he stepped inside. The cool air conditioning hit him like a blessing, and he kicked off his Italian leather shoes with a sigh of relief. The envelope joined a stack of unopened mail on the granite kitchen counter: credit card offers, grocery store circulars, and what looked like another HOA notice from 2 weeks ago. Not tonight, he muttered, loosening his tie. The envelope landed in the trash can with a satisfying thunk. Upstairs, David's phone buzzed as he changed into pajamas. Sarah's face filled the screen, her smile radiant despite the late hour. "Hey, stranger," she said when he answered. "How was Chicago?" "Long, brutal. The Peterson account is finally locked down, though." He settled onto the edge of the bed, feeling some of the day's tension drain away at the sound of her voice. "I miss you. I miss you too. 2 more weeks and I'll be back from Mom's." Sarah's expression softened. "She's doing better, but the physical therapy is taking longer than expected. Take all the time you need. Your mom comes first." David meant it, though the empty house felt cavernous without Sarah's laughter echoing through the rooms. "How's the shoulder?" "Getting stronger every day." She actually managed to brush her own hair this morning. Sarah's eyes sparkled with pride. "Listen, I got a weird call from your neighbor today." "Karen, something." David's stomach dropped. "Morrison, what did she want?" "She was asking about some landscaping project. Something about permits and timelines." Sarah frowned. "I told her you'd call her back, but she seemed pretty worked up about it." "I'll handle it," David said quickly. "You know how she gets about the neighborhood rules." "Okay, but maybe don't wait too long." She mentioned something about deadlines. They talked for another 10 minutes. Sarah's mother was sleeping better. The doctors were optimistic. The small Connecticut town where Sarah grew up was exactly as boring as she remembered. Normal, comfortable conversation that made David's world feel stable again. After they hung up, he stood at the bedroom window, looking out over Willowbrook Estates. Every lawn was perfectly trimmed, every driveway pressure washed, every house painted in approved earth tones. It was exactly the kind of controlled perfection that had attracted him when he'd bought the house 3 years ago. No surprises, no chaos, no drama. Below, he could see Karen Morrison's house across the street, its windows dark except for one upstairs room where a pale blue light flickered, probably her computer screen. Even at midnight, she was probably working on some new HOA initiative, crafting another set of rules to govern their little suburban kingdom. David pulled the curtains closed and crawled into bed, pushing thoughts of Karen Morrison and HOA paperwork from his mind. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. The Yamamoto presentation needed to be perfect, and his assistant had scheduled back-to-back calls, starting at 7 a.m. Whatever Karen wanted could wait. 3 houses down, Marcus Williams was just getting home from his second job, the security uniform wrinkled and coffee-stained from a 12-hour shift. He'd seen David's BMW pull in, had watched the brief interaction with the envelope on the doorstep. Marcus had gotten his own envelope 3 days ago. Something about his fence being 6 inches too tall, according to new HOA regulations. The fine was $200, with additional daily penalties, if not corrected within 10 business days. $200 might as well have been $2,000. With Keisha's medical bills and Tyler's college applications, every penny was already spoken for. Marcus had measured the fence himself with a borrowed tape measure. 6 feet, 2 inches. Exactly what it had been when they'd moved in 5 years. I'll go. Exactly what had been approved by the previous HOA board. But Karen Morrison's new regime operated by different rules. Marcus trudged up his front steps, noting the way his neighbor's house gleamed under the streetlights. David Chen drove a car that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 years, lived in a house twice the size of Marcus's modest colonial, and had the luxury of throwing away HOA notices without a second thought. Some people, Marcus thought as he quietly turned his key in the lock. Had no idea how good they had it. The morning sun hit David's face at exactly 6:30 a.m., filtered through the gaps in his bedroom curtains. He'd forgotten to draw them completely closed, and now golden light streamed across the hardwood floors, warming the Egyptian cotton sheets that Sarah had insisted they needed. The house felt too quiet without her morning routine, the gentle hum of the coffee maker, the soft patter of her feet on the stairs, the way she'd hum unconsciously while getting ready for work. David's phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all received between 6 o'clock and 6:15 a.m. His blood pressure spiked as he scrolled through them. His assistant, his boss, 3 different clients, all asking variations of the same question: what the hell is happening at your house? The attached photos made his stomach lurch. His driveway was gone. In its place was a perfect rectangle of gray concrete, smooth as glass and clearly fresh. His BMW sat in the center like a monument, its tires completely encased in cement up to the wheel wells. The car looked like it had been dipped in concrete and left to cure, a modern art installation titled Expensive Mistake. David threw on clothes and ran outside barefoot, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The cement was already hardening in the morning sun, its surface smooth and professional. This wasn't vandalism, this was construction. Someone had hired professionals, brought in equipment, planned this operation with military precision. Admiring the craftsmanship, Karen. Morrison's voice cut through his shock like a blade. She stood at the edge of his property line, clipboard in hand, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably costs more than most people's monthly salary. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She looked like a woman who'd been awake for hours, preparing for this moment. What did you do? David's voice came out as a croak. I enforced the HOA regulations, as outlined in Section 12.4 of the Community Charter. Karen's smile was warm and professional, the same expression she wore at neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties. You were notified of the violation 3 months ago, given ample opportunity to comply, and chose to ignore repeated warnings. What violation? What are you talking about? Karen consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. Unpermitted landscape modification, specifically the installation of decorative river stones along your driveway border. The original violation notice was delivered on April 15th, with follow-up notices on May 1st and May 20th. All went unanswered. David's mind raced back to April. He'd been traveling constantly. The Peterson account had required trips to 3 different cities, and Sarah had been dealing with her mother's accident. Riverstones. He couldn't even remember the landscaping company, he said suddenly. They said it was included in the spring cleanup package. Unpermitted modifications require HOA approval, regardless of who installs them. This is clearly outlined in the homeowner's manual you received upon purchase. Karen's tone remained pleasant, conversational. The final notice, delivered last evening, specified that failure to remove the stones by 6 a.m. today would result in remedial action to ensure community standards. You cemented my car into my driveway. I contracted Morrison Construction, my nephew's company, to install a compliant concrete driveway surface, replacing the non-conforming decorative elements. The presence of your vehicle during the installation was unfortunate timing. David stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The woman was insane. She had to be. Normal people didn't respond to landscaping disputes by trapping $80,000 cars in concrete. This is destruction of property. I'm calling the police. The police have already been notified, Karen said calmly. Officer Rodriguez will be here shortly to document that all work was performed on my property. Driveway ease. David's home office had been transformed into a war room within 48 hours. 3 folding tables lined the walls, covered with property surveys, city zoning maps, and printouts of municipal codes. A whiteboard dominated one wall, filled with names, dates, and connections drawn in red marker. It looked like the headquarters of someone planning either a major business acquisition or a very sophisticated revenge plot. Both descriptions were accurate. The Morrison construction permit was filed under emergency infrastructure repair, David said into his phone, pacing between the tables. But the work order lists it as decorative concrete installation. Those are 2 completely different categories, with different fee structures. On the other end of the line, Janet Kowalski from the City Planning Department sighed. Mr. Chen, I understand your frustration, but unless there's evidence of deliberate misrepresentation, Janet, I'm looking at the documents right now. The permit application claims my driveway was structurally compromised and posed a safety hazard to the community. The actual work order describes aesthetic enhancement of residential entrance. David pulled up the files on his laptop. Someone lied to get a rush permit, and I think we both know who. A long pause. Send me copies of everything. If there's a discrepancy, we'll investigate. David smiled as he ended the call. Janet owed him a favor from the Peterson development. Her department had fast-tracked the environmental impact study, shaving 6 months off the approval process. Time to collect. His doorbell rang, followed immediately by the sound of his front door opening. Sarah's voice echoed through the house. David, I'm home. He found her in the kitchen, travel bags still in hand, staring out the window at his concrete-encased BMW. The news crews had finally left yesterday, but the car remained as a monument to Karen Morrison's precision and David's carelessness. "It's worse in person," Sarah said quietly. "It's temporary." David kissed her cheek, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. "How's your mom, Betta? Cleared by the physical therapist yesterday." Sarah set down her bag and turned to face him. "David, what really happened here?" He'd practiced this conversation during the 2-hour drive from the airport. "Keep it simple. Stick to the facts. Don't mention the growing obsession that had consumed him for the past 2 days. Karen Morrison has been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. I missed some paperwork, and she decided to make an example of me." David shrugged, as if having your car cemented into your driveway was a minor inconvenience. "It'll be resolved soon." Sarah studied his face with the expression she wore when reviewing contracts: patient, thorough, missing nothing. "Show me the office." "What, your office? The one you've been working in for 2 days straight?" According to Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's smile was sharp. "She's been very chatty since I got back. Apparently you've had quite a few visitors." David led her upstairs, his stomach tightening with each step. The war room looked even more intense in Sarah's presence, like the headquarters of someone who'd lost perspective entirely. "Jesus, David." Sarah walked slowly around the tables, taking in the maps, the flowcharts, the detailed timeline of Karen Morrison's activities over the past 6 months. "This isn't about getting your car fixed. Karen Morrison violated city permitting regulations, lied on official documents, and used her position to settle a personal vendetta." David's voice rose with each word. "She thinks she can do whatever she wants because people are too intimidated to fight back. So you're going to what? Destroy her?" "I'm going to remove her from a position where she can abuse her power." Sarah picked up a folder labeled Morrison Financial Holdings and flipped through it. Bank records, property ownership documents, business registrations, all public information, but compiled with the thoroughness of an FBI investigation. "How did you get all this?" "Marcus Williams works security for the company that handles the city records building." David pulled out a chair for her. "Turns out, Karen fined him $200 for a fence that was 6 inches too tall, according to regulations that didn't exist when he built it." Amazing how helpful people become when they realize they're not alone. Sarah sat down, still reading. "David, this is ... a lot. She owns 12 rental properties in the city, all managed through Morrison Property Group. 3 of them have outstanding code violations that somehow never get reported to the planning department. Her nephew's construction company has won every major HOA contract for the past 2 years, despite being 15% higher than competing bids." David pulled out another folder. "And the best part, the HOA has been paying inflated prices for emergency repairs that coincidentally require services only Morrison Construction can provide." "You think she's embezzling?" "I think she's running a very sophisticated operation that benefits her family's businesses at the expense of the homeowners." David opened his laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. "Look at this. The HOA budget has increased 40% over the past 3 years, but community improvements have actually decreased. Where's the money going?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents spread across the table. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. "This is good work," she said finally. "Thorough, well documented, probably enough to trigger a formal investigation." David felt a surge of relief. "So you understand why I had to, but it's also completely insane." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "David, you've been home from Chicago for 3 days. In that time, you've assembled a case file that would make a forensic accountant proud, apparently recruited half the neighborhood into some kind of anti-Coran coalition, and turned our home office into a situation room." She gestured at the whiteboard. "Normal people would have just paid the fine and moved on. Normal people don't have $80,000 cars cemented into their driveways. Normal people read their mail." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. David felt his carefully constructed justifications crumble under Sarah's steady gaze. "She humiliated me," he said finally, "in front of the whole neighborhood, on the news, everywhere. Made me look like an idiot who's too self-important to follow basic rules. And now you're proving her right by turning this into some kind of personal crusade." David's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Williams. "Karen just pulled into City Hall. Meeting with planning department in conference room B. Thought you should know." "I have to go," David said, grabbing his keys. "David, one meeting. I'll be back in an hour." But Sarah had already turned back to the folders, her expression troubled. As David headed for the door, he heard her sigh, a sound that carried more disappointment than anger, which somehow made it worse. City Hall occupied a converted Victorian mansion on Main Street, its grand staircase and ornate moldings at odds with the fluorescent lights and industrial carpeting of modern municipal government. David arrived 15 minutes after Karen's meeting was scheduled to begin, parking his rental car, the indignity of which still stung. In a visitor spot, the building directory showed the planning department on the 2nd floor. David climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his mind racing through possible scenarios. If Karen was trying to legitimize her permit after the fact, or worse, File some kind of complaint against him for harassment, ... double quotes, Mr. Chen. David turned to find Janet Kowalski emerging from the elevator, a thick folder under her arm. She looked tired and frustrated, never a good sign when dealing with city bureaucracy. Janet, any luck with those permit discrepancies? That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Janet gestured toward a small conference room. Do you have a few minutes? They settled into uncomfortable chairs around a scarred wooden table. Janet opened her folder and spread out several documents, the same ones David had sent her, along with additional paperwork he didn't recognize. The good news is that you're absolutely right about the permit application, Janet said. Morrison Construction filed for emergency infrastructure repair, which fast-tracks approval and reduces fees. But the actual work performed was clearly decorative concrete installation. So Karen lied on the application. Not exactly. Janet pulled out another document. The application was filed by Morrison Construction, not Mrs. Morrison personally. And technically, the work order matches the permit. Your driveway was completely replaced with new concrete. David felt his stomach drop. But the bad news is more complicated. Janet's expression grew grim. Mrs. Morrison was here this morning to file a formal complaint about harassment. She claims you've been conducting surveillance on her property, following her family members, and using your business connections to intimidate city employees. That's ridiculous. Is it? Janet pulled out her phone and showed David a series of photos. Him sitting in his car across from Karen's house yesterday morning. Him talking to Marcus Williams outside the records building. Him approaching Janet herself in the parking lot after the city council meeting. These are all public places, David said weakly. Mr. Chen, I've known you for 3 years. You're a good guy who got caught up in a stupid situation. Janet leaned forward. But from the outside, this looks like a successful businessman using his resources to wage a personal vendetta against a volunteer community leader. She cemented. My car into my driveway, after following proper procedures for HOA violations, all documented, all legal, all within her authority as HOAP. The Willowbrook Community Center hadn't seen this many residents since the Christmas cookie exchange 3 years ago. David counted 47 people scattered across the folding chairs, their faces ranging from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. Karen Morrison sat in the front row, flanked by her usual supporters, the Hendersons, Mrs. Chen from Oak Street, and surprisingly, the Yamamoto family who lived directly across from David. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, David said, standing behind the small podium. His voice echoed slightly in the underutilized space. I know Sunday evening isn't ideal, but I felt it was important to address some concerns about our HOA leadership before things go any further. Karen's laugh was sharp and theatrical. Mr. Chen, this is highly irregular. HOA meetings require proper notice, and this isn't an official HOA meeting, David interrupted smoothly. This is a community forum. Perfectly legal, perfectly appropriate, and long overdue. He clicked a remote, and the first slide appeared on the borrowed projector screen. Willowbrook Estates Financial Transparency Report over the past week. I've had the opportunity to review our community's financial records, all of which are public information available to any homeowner upon request. David's tone was conversational, professional, the same voice he used to present development proposals to city councils. What I found was ... concerning. The next slide showed a bar graph comparing HOA fees to community improvements over the past 5 years. The fees showed steady increases while improvements remained flat or declined. Our annual dues have increased 47% since 2020, David continued. But our common area maintenance budget has actually decreased by 12%. Our community amenities, the playground, the walking trails, the landscaping have received minimal investment, despite higher revenues. Margaret Henderson raised her hand. Mr. Chen, are you suggesting I'm not suggesting anything? Mrs. Henderson, I'm presenting facts. David clicked to the next slide, a detailed breakdown of contractor expenses, but these facts raise interesting questions. Marcus Williams sat in the back row, nodding slowly as David walked through the numbers. They'd spent hours yesterday afternoon cross-referencing invoices with actual work performed, building a timeline of financial irregularities that painted a disturbing picture. Morrison Construction has received $340,000 in HOA contracts over the past 3 years, David said. That's 73% of our total contractor budget, despite consistently submitting bids 10 to 15% higher than competitors. Morrison Construction provides quality work at fair prices, Karen said, her voice tight. The board always accepts the lowest qualified bid. Actually, that's not accurate. David clicked to a new slide, showing bid comparisons. Here's the contract for last year's sidewalk repairs. Morrison Construction bid $47,000. Garcia Bros bid $38,000. Thompson Concrete bid $41,000. Yet Morrison was awarded the contract. A murmur went through the room. David could see neighbors leaning forward, suddenly paying attention in a way they hadn't when this was just about his personal dispute with Karen. The board minutes from that meeting indicate Morrison was selected due to superior materials And timeline advantages, David continued. But Garcia Brothers has been doing municipal concrete work for 15 years. And Thompson actually completed our neighbor community's identical project 2 months ahead of schedule. James Yamamoto raised his hand. Are you saying the bidding process was rigged? I'm saying the process lacks transparency and accountability. David's response was carefully measured. Every contractor selection should be clearly documented with objective criteria. Currently, those records either don't exist or aren't available. For homeowner review, Karen stood up, her composure finally cracking. This is a witch hunt. Mr. Chen is upset about a legitimate HOA violation and is now throwing around baseless accusations to deflect from his own irresponsibility. Mrs. Morrison, please sit down. The voice came from the back of the room, calm but authoritative. Everyone turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but Willowbrook's retired pediatrician who'd lived in the community longer than anyone else. Beth, thank you for being here, Karen said, her tone instantly warmer. I'm sure you can help explain to Mr. Chen how proper HOA governance actually? Karen, I'm here because several neighbors have expressed concerns about financial management. Dr. Warren's voice carried the same gentle firmness she'd once used to convince children to take their medicine. Concerns that predate Mr. Chen's parking situation. The room went completely silent. Dr. Warren was Willowbrook's unofficial, moral authority, the person neighbors called when disputes needed mediation or major decisions required wisdom. Her opinion carried more weight than any elected position. For the past year, I've been asking for detailed financial reports. Dr. Warren continued. Each time, I'm told the information is available upon request. But when I make formal requests, I receive summaries rather than actual documentation. Karen's face had gone pale. The board has always provided appropriate financial transparency. Karen, I served on corporate boards for 30 years before retiring. I know what appropriate financial transparency looks like. Dr. Warren's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. What we've been receiving wouldn't pass muster at a high school student council meeting. David felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, community leaders willing to ask hard questions, rather than accept Karen's explanations at face value. Dr. Warren raises valid concerns, David said, clicking to his final slide. Which is why I'm proposing we form a financial oversight committee, comprised of volunteers with relevant professional experience, to conduct a comprehensive audit of HOA finances and operational procedures. The room erupted in competing voices, some supportive, others hostile, most confused about what exactly they were being asked to support. This is ridiculous. Karen's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Chen parks illegally, ignores multiple violation notices, and now wants to turn his personal embarrassment into some kind of community coup. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, Mr. Chen's parking was completely legal. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase and several rolled documents. David didn't recognize her, but from Karen's expression, this was not a welcome surprise. I'm sorry, but this is a private community meeting, Karen said quickly. If you're with the media, I'm Angela Foster, licensed surveyor with Foster and Associates. The woman walked to the front of the room and began unrolling what looked like a property survey. I was hired to conduct an independent property line survey for this address. David's pulse quickened. He hadn't hired a surveyor, which meant someone else had someone with enough knowledge of property law to know that the easement claims were worth investigating. According to county records and the original development plat, Foster continued, spreading the survey across a table, the HOA easement extends 12 inches from the curb, not 18 inches as claimed in recent violation proceedings. Room went dead silent. Karen's face had shifted from pale to ashen. Furthermore, Foster continued, Mr. Chen's vehicle was parked entirely on private property according to current property boundaries. The concrete work performed by Morrison Construction actually encroached 6 inches onto private property without owner consent. That's impossible, Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. I have documentation, you have documentation. Based on an outdated survey from 1987, before the street was widened in 1994, Foster pulled out another document. The easement boundaries changed when the county expanded the roadway, but apparently no one updated the HOA records. David stared at the surveyor, his mind racing. If she was right, then Karen's entire justification for the concrete work collapsed. More than that, if Morrison Construction had worked on private property without permission, that was trespassing and property damage. Who hired you? David asked. Foster smiled. That information is confidential, but I will say this: someone in your community takes property rights very seriously. Marcus Williams cleared his throat from the back of the room. All eyes turned to him as he stood up slowly, looking uncomfortable with the attention. I hired her, he said quietly. Used most of my savings, but I figured if Karen was wrong about Mr. Chen's property line, she might be wrong about mine too. The room buzzed with new energy. Marcus had been one of Karen's primary targets. Fine repeatedly for minor violations that seem to increase in severity and cost over time. My fence isn't 6 inches too tall, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. According to the actual property survey, it's exactly where it should be, which means I've been paying fines and penalties for something that was never a violation in the first place. Karen tried to speak, but Dr. Warren held up a hand. I think we've heard enough for tonight, the older woman said, but I want to make a formal motion that this community establish a financial oversight committee, as Mr. Chen suggested, and that we also commission an independent review of all recent violation proceedings. Seconded, came a voice from the middle of the room, then another. Within moments, half the room was voicing support. This is completely irregular, Kieran protested. The HOA board has to approve any committee formation, and